They just don't make cars like they used to. Elegant designs and incredible craftsmanship. Get your driving gloves, buckle up, and join us for today's video as we take a look at 15 of the most beautiful vintage cars. Number 15. 1971 De Tomaso Pantera. A V8 engine coupled with the sleek Italian design, the De Tomaso Pantera is one hot car. Created in the 1970s as an alternative to the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris of the day, the Pantera was definitely a worthy opponent. And like any great sports car, it sounded as loud as it looked, drawing lots of well-deserved attention wherever it went. But the hybrid of Italian design and hard-working American ingenuity of the engine made it a much easier car to drive than its competitors in terms of handling. The car also had its signature T-shaped symbol emblazoned on the grille, which is the same symbol De Tomaso ancestors used to brand their cattle on their ranch so many years ago. And while the Pantera was known to show signs of corrosion after exposure to time and the elements, it's nothing a good mechanic and a little paint job can't take care of. And if you do manage to find one of these Italian Panthers for sale, it's on the more affordable side depending on who you ask. One of these bad boys can go for about 85 grand, used, obviously. Number 14. 1963 Porsche 356. The German car manufacturer Porsche has been providing people with luxury sports cars for almost 100 years, so it should come as no surprise that one of their beautiful vintage models is on our list. The 1964 Porsche 356 may not look as sleek as the Porsche models roaring through the streets today, but back in the swinging 60s, anyone with this car was the talk of the town. This two-door car was small and nimble and handled itself very well on the road because of its light weight. It came with a rear engine, rear-wheel drive, and was available in both a hardtop and open configuration. The Porsche 356 looks like it could be in any old movie full of high-octane car chases from back in the day. It went from 0 to 60 in about 12 seconds, which by today's standards isn't the fastest, but back then it was pretty impressive on the track. But procuring one today may be a bit of a challenge. During its production in the 1960s, about 76,000 were made, but the catch is that only about half have survived. That's a pretty rare find. Number 13. 1970 Datsun 240Z. We can't have a list of hot cars without heading over to the land of the rising sun. The 1970 Datsun 240Z is a Japanese sports car offering plenty of horsepower and a luxury interior without breaking the bank. It also paved the way for other Japanese car manufacturers like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan to become accepted and embraced by Western consumers in the following years. The Datsun 240Z came with an overhead cam engine, disc brakes, and independent suspension. And while none of these features were invented by the Datsun, they certainly perfected them and were able to incorporate those systems better than anyone else at the time. Known as the Z car, the Datsun 240Z was the perfect ride for joyrides in the summertime, as well as coast-to-coast trips, making it as versatile as it was stylish. Now, perhaps many vintage car enthusiasts wouldn't call it a sports car at all, since it works so well for day-to-day use. It may not have been the choice automobile for Steve McQueen, but at a price point of about $3,600, it was definitely a more affordable option for collectors and speed freaks. Number 12. 1977 Ferrari 308 GTS. Take a look at this car, and you'll know exactly who built it. The prancing horses are all over both the interior and exteriors, as if to let everyone else on the road know just what they're up against. Or you could just chalk it up to being one of the world's fastest and biggest advertisements. Either way, the 1977 Ferrari 308 GTS is one sleek vintage automobile. This model was made of fiberglass, just like a Corvette or a boat. Pop open the hood and you'll see a V8 engine with belts driving the 4 camshafts, so it purrs when it's speeding down the highway instead of screams. Okay, maybe it's a loud purr. But the 1977 GTS's fiberglass body made it lighter, easier to handle, and even repair than some of its steel-bodied counterparts. And when you're sitting in the driver's seat, you're greeted by some delicious poofy vinyl that covers everything from the seats to the dashboard. And the speedometer went up to 180 miles an hour, so you could drive this beautiful vintage car off into the sunset without looking back. Number 11. 1967 Chevrolet Camaro. Most people probably don't know this, but the word Camaro translates to comrade or pal. And so that's exactly how you should feel about the 1967 Chevrolet Camaro. While Ford was absolutely killing it with their Mustang, the team at Chevrolet was cooking up what would become the Mustang's rival for about 2 years. And this automobile came with a lot more style and a lot more power with its roaring 180 horsepower turbocharged V8 engine that took it from 0 to 60 in less than 8 seconds. The 1967 Chevrolet Camaro came with a front engine, rear-wheel drive, and was a 4-passenger sedan with an all-steel integral body with a front subframe. By the time the car was manufactured by the automobile giant, it went for about $3,400, which by today's standards is pretty cheap. Even adjusting for inflation, that's still under $30,000 by today's standards. The Chevy Camaro was turning heads well before it was turning into a robot on the big screen as the iteration of what we know it for today. But plenty were manufactured back in the late 1960s and are still in circulation online today. Number 10. 1968 Fiat 124 Spider. Making its electric debut at the 1966 Turin Auto Show, the Fiat 124 Spider is one sleek automobile. It was styled by the Italian Pininfarina and the American expatriate Tom Tejarda, who took notes from the Corvette and the Rondine. At the time, the Fiat 124 Spider was a state-of-the-art automobile with a 5-speed transmission, 4-wheel disc brakes, and an easy-to-operate soft top for when you want to catch some rays and feel the wind in your hair as you tear down the speedway. These specs were a much welcome change from the typical English sports cars of the late 1960s, which typically used drum brakes, overhead valve engines, and much clunkier convertible tops that needed to be essentially assembled like a tent. And the 124 Spider came at a much lower price point to boot. Today you can grab one of these beautiful vintage cars online, and if you're willing to put in the time and the effort, you can probably nab one for just under $10,000. If you want it to be ready to go, well, that may be a little bit harder to find, and you can probably double or even triple that price tag. But it may be worth it for the Italian-American design car. Number 9. 1959 Austin Healey 3000. The Austin Healey 3000 has a name that makes it sound more like a supercomputer than it does a stylish sports car. Introduced in 1959 at the London Motor Show with the famous bulbous design that still manages to be very easy on the eyes, the Austin Healey 3000 was an absolute automotive icon of the swinging 60s. This model would make Austin Powers proud. It has a pretty tough-to-beat combination of structural strength and top-notch performance, and handling that made it the choice racer for the best drivers of the time, like Pat Moss and David Siegel Morris. They careened through alpine passes at speeds of 75 miles an hour and flew past a lot more of the sophisticated and more expensive sports cars of the time. But part of what made that car so unique was the manufacturers were able to improve upon the engine while still cutting down on costs, making it a faster and still affordable option for thrill seekers, collectors, and rally racers alike, as it went from 0 to 90 miles an hour in 26 seconds. Not bad for a car that's older than your parents. Number 8. 1964 Aston Martin DB5. It is virtually impossible to make a list of the most beautiful vintage cars without talking about the automobile fit to be on Her Majesty's Secret Service. We're of course talking about the 1964 Aston Martin DB5, which was a personal favorite of Mr. Bond, James Bond himself. And while the normal model doesn't come outfitted with machine guns and countermeasures, the Aston Martin DB5 is still a top-notch automobile. The car came with an enlarged and all-aluminum engine, 3 SU carburetors, and a new and improved ZF 5-speed engine that took the car up to speeds of 145 miles an hour, which is just the right speed to make a dashing getaway. And naturally, the car was beautiful both inside and out. The interior was made up of reclining seats, wool pile carpets, and full leather trim in the cabin. And while we'd never condone drinking and driving, it might be just the perfect car to pull into the driveway with and pop open a bottle of champagne and relax with your favorite Bond girl when the job is done. This is a vintage car that will leave you shaken, not stirred. Number 7. 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. When it comes to American muscle, nobody does it quite like the Ford Mustang, and their 1969 Boss 429 was no exception to that rule. In order to fit their new competitive engine, the folks at Ford had to make a few tweaks to the Mustang that have given the car its timeless look. The first thing that catches the eye of the exterior is the chrome ring surrounding the radiator grille and the sealed beam headlights. You've got the thin, rounding front bumper that wraps around the entire front end, and sitting on the front of the rectangular-shaped Mustang is the air vent that gives the car its fast and furious feel. It is an intimidating look for a sports car to have, to say the least. But pull up to the high school parking lot in one of these and you'll quickly become the coolest kid on campus, especially if you've got it in the signature raven black color. Then step inside for some vinyl seats and the absolutely gorgeous wood trim dashboard. Number 6. 1963 Corvette Stingray. There were some pretty serious wait lists to purchase the Corvette Stingray when it first burst onto the scene back in 1963. And while you may think of the model as a sports car, it also proves its worth as a touring car as well. Manufactured as a response to the fast and stylish European cars of the day, the Stingray was able to reach a top speed of 118 miles per hour with a 300 brake horsepower engine. It proved to be the superior model in terms of performance, handling, ride comfort, habitability, and even trunk space for whenever you want to take a speedy trip. Perhaps one of the few drawbacks of the design, however, is that the trunk is only accessible through the interior of the car, seeing as how the engine and spare tire were both housed in the rear. But sometimes you have to make small sacrifices when you're building one of the most beautiful cars around. And while there was some space for a rear passenger, the Corvette Stingray was best enjoyed either with just one friend riding shotgun or speeding down the highway solo to clear the mind. Number 5. 1966 Alfa Romeo Spider Duetto. Movie buffs may recognize this entry to the list as the car Dustin Hoffman's character drove in the film The Graduate. And much like the film, the 1966 Alfa Romeo Spider Duetto is regarded as a designed classic, and it remained in production for almost 3 decades with very few changes made over the years. It has since become a bit of a cult favorite when it comes to Italian-made cars, and it's no secret why. The small and sleek Spider Duetto is a 2-seat convertible with a twin-cam engine, more accurate steering, responsive brakes, and a finely balanced chassis. It shouldn't come as a surprise then that the Spider Duetto sold well over 100,000 units in less than 30 years of its run, even though it came with the same price tag as the much faster Jaguar E-Type. Sometimes looks are everything. The more modern design and top-notch specs made it one of the better sports cars to come out of post-war Italy, and even earned the nickname the poor man's Ferrari. But that's okay, because we'll gladly take a 66 Spider Duetto any day. Number 4. 1969 Dodge Charger. The Dodge Charger was designed because a previous iteration needed a serious facelift, but the end product was more than anyone could have bargained for. The Charger's only real competition in 1969 was from Corvette, but the former managed to surpass it in terms of both design and performance. The Dodge Charger had a larger wheelbase and seating capacity and was still able to maintain the sporty and modern look of American muscle. The Charger is simply more aerodynamic and came with an ultra-cool spoiler and truncated rear, and the design approach quickly caught on in the world of race cars. The chassis was able to accommodate both stock and drag tires for the car that was able to go from 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds. To keep things simple, the car was as fast as a bat out of hell and looked just as cool to boot. At the time, it was the epitome of American engineering and ingenuity, and was the perfect car to make everyone behind you eat your dust. Number 3. 1966 Lamborghini Miura. Miura is a type of Spanish fighting bull, and the 1966 Lamborghini Miura is no different. This bad boy came with a 430 horsepower V12 engine mounted in the rear, and came with a 5-speed transmission. Was it the safest car on the roads? No. But was it one of the most beautiful? Absolutely. The only thing that mattered to the folks at Lamborghini was beating Ferrari in sales and then reputation. And boy, did they ever when they reached the American markets. And while the Miura was developed mainly for the streets, the manufacturer had hoped to see it become a racing car, which unfortunately for Lamborghini never happened. And while the Miura was both ambitious and exotic in concept, it managed to be practically executed with a minimalist, sharp, and yet sophisticated model that tied all of the moving parts together quite nicely. Number 2. 1962 Ferrari 250 GTE. In 1960s Italy, local police were having a hard time catching criminals when it came to high-speed chases. Their cars simply hadn't caught up with the times, let alone the bad guys. That's why they adopted the Ferrari 250 GTE. It sounds like the plot of a cheesy B-movie, but it's true. So the police bought these fast cars to catch the criminals. The GTE came with a rebuilt chassis and bodywork and a fresh V12 engine that let it reach a top speed of 120 miles an hour. This automobile also became one of Ferrari's top-selling and most beloved models of all time, despite the factory price of over $12,000. And while the design is both sleek and compact, the vinyl interiors also provided a sizable amount of space for the maximum amount of comfort for drivers, both civilian and law enforcement, who would rip and roar down the streets. More recently, one of the black Italian police models went on sale, and the police lights are still in working order if you want to clear away any traffic to hit max speed on the way to the grocery store. Number 1. 1958 Corvette C1. What else could it have been? Even though the Corvette wasn't the powerhouse that it is today, they managed to change the car in 1958 with their C1 model. It was the fastest car on the street and absolutely dominated the racetracks, and finally brought them the respect and the cash that the company deserved. The onset of the C1 was so amazing that Ford had to take a step back to rethink their new Thunderbird. The bar had been raised higher than ever before. It had an incredibly cool and luxurious design, but when you took a seat inside, the dashboard was completely dominated by the speedometer that goes up to 160 miles per hour. That's not to mention the gauges monitoring the oil, fuel levels, battery charge, and even the engine temperature that made it feel like you were a race car driver. There was even a grab bar for whoever was riding shotgun when the driver hit the gas good and hard, going from 0 to 60 in under 10 seconds. Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.